Welcome to a post-election edition of Swing State. Tonight I am joined by High Point University Professor Brandon Lenore and UNC Greensboro Professor Hunter Bacow to talk about what happened this past week, what it means, and how things may play out in the future. And I think we could just cover the whole half hour by me starting by saying those two words, what happened?
Well, I think that when you look at the vote totals, Kamala Harris basically got the same votes that Joe Biden did 4 years ago, but the pie got bigger, and those votes went for Donald Trump.
Yeah, she actually overall nationwide underperformed. I think,
Underperformed,
but in North Carolina, almost identical. Yes.
Go back farther, and you hear it again. It's the economy, stupid. I think that issue really resonated with a lot of people. That hits them in the pocketbook.
Did Democrats just not see that? Or Kamala Harris's campaign not see that?
I think she was weighted down by that, and she was trying to get away from it because everybody's pinning it on the Biden administration, based on his approval numbers and how she was rating politically in the polls.
But she didn't seem to make a strong effort to get away from it.
Well, she was kind of darned if you do, darned if you don't. I mean, if she stepped too far away from Biden's record, then she didn't have a whole lot to run on, and she probably would have had backlash within the Democratic Party. Right. And then the flip side is, if you're going to take credit for the good things, you get the bad things hung on you.
See, but I think she could have disrespected or distanced herself from her former boss and been forgiven by Democratic voters anyway, because they were just so averse to the other guy, that it wasn't going to drive them to vote for Trump. That's my 2 cents. But I kind of saw it as a death by a thousand cuts, so to speak. I have a map I want to show you of just the Triad counties, and what President Trump's idea, I guess, was just improve a little bit everywhere. These are the essential counties of the Triad, where you see them in red, and that number is how much the vote for President Trump improved versus 2020. Now, interestingly, Davidson County, the one blue county, is reliably Republican county, but Vice President Harris actually performed 1% better than Joe Biden did 4 years ago. But 4% in Rockingham County, other than that, it's 1 or 2. But you add that up over 100 counties. And actually, if you look, Mecklenburg and Wake County, President Trump was up 1 point better than he was 4 years ago. Wake and Mecklenburg. Well, I mean, that's a strategy right there.
It's a strategy, and I think that they really went after new voters. The exit polls are showing that the new voters broke for Trump over 50%. And I think that might be part of the reason why we're seeing that 1% bump across the board in each of the counties are those new voters.
And things are flipping. Older voters tended to vote more Democratic, which they don't normally do. Hunter, you said that you didn't think that the vice president had enough time to redefine herself. But my view is she made no effort. She would not take hard positions. She kept repeating these rehearsed lines.
I understand that, and she, if we look at it in total, she had 4 years to kind of redefine herself. Right. But she didn't, she couldn't. She's vice president. Those don't hold much weight in policy discussions anyway. But coming out and campaigning, she only basically had 90 to 120 days, and we all know that he who approximates the center wins. And you just don't. That's not enough time to be one person in January and turn around and be somebody else in June. You can do it. You can't do it from August to October.
Well, in a second, I'm going to show you what I think was the most important moment. Before we get to that, I also want to show another figure, and this has to do with the black vote in North Carolina only. In 2020, President Trump got 7%. This time, he almost tripled it, 20%. That may not seem like a lot, but the black male vote in this state is about 11%. You increase that by 3 times. That's enough to win in a tight election.
Definitely, and when we were looking at the polls going into the election, and that's another conversation about the closeness and the lack of variance, but the fact is the polls were showing a slight advantage for Donald Trump, and I think that between new voters and the switch within traditionally Democratic voting populations, he was able to sew it up.
What about, though, this idea that some black voters owed some allegiance? We saw President Obama, I think, hint at that when he said, he called them the bros or the brothers needed to come home. Charlemagne the God, who no matter what you may think, I think he's a really bright guy and an astute, keen observer of the body politic. He's on that morning show, radio show, The Breakfast Club, and he says, folks, this is not about racism.
No, I don't think it is. I think what was going on is that you had these people, and these are your low propensity voters who don't turn out all the time. And so I think everybody was truly affected by the economy. I think it's something that resonated. I think that Obama even having to say that was endemic to them not performing for Harris.
All right, here's what I think was the most damaging moment of the campaign for the vice president. She went on The View, which is about as welcoming situation as you can find, and was asked what I call a softball question. Sonny Hostin said, would you have done anything differently than President Biden during the past 4 years? And her answer was simply, there's not a thing that comes to mind. No major party candidate should give that answer to that question.
There was an opportunity. She had the ability to say, I think that we should have gone more after the border security. We could have done more to make sure that the bite of inflation wasn't affecting working families. But she whiffed it on the underhand pitch.
It hurt her more for the people she was trying to get to vote for her, because that's a women-based show. And so she was saying that among a female audience, and that just not going to work well for you. I don't care who you are.
And real quickly, before I want to get to President Biden and what he said this week, but Latino voters, half of President Biden's going to, or President Trump looks like he's going to win male Latino voters. And people said, how could they do that after all he said about immigrants? But they're in the polling and the research, they're saying, well, he wasn't talking about us.
That's not new. If you look at the border counties in Texas, there's some research on there that demonstrates that the Latino vote is not strictly Democratic. I mean, they're largely Catholic, so you're pulling that to them. And then they don't like the border crossings.
But when it comes to all this, immigrants and they're causing problems, these voters said, well, he's not talking about us.
They don't consider themselves immigrants. They live in the U.S.
But it shows the discernment in their minds, which I think is important. We have just a minute, less than a minute. I want to get to this because I thought it was good. This week on Thursday, President Biden spoke in the Rose Garden, and he had this to say about post-election. Take a listen.
Campaigns are contests of competing visions. The country chooses one or the other. We accept the choice the country made. I've said many times, you can't love your country only when you win.
Two words that come to mind when I see that is one, unburdened. He seems unburdened, which is great. And it was the most presidential I've seen him in a while.
Well, I think it was a good message, especially in a tumultuous time. We came off of a very contentious election, and I think those were the right words to be saying.
Yeah, especially after what we saw 4 years ago, right?
He's not a true ideologue either. He's always been in the middle, so it's always worked for him to be a peacemaker, so to speak, and a power broker.
So what will a second Trump administration look like? We look at the names that we're hearing of the people who may populate, plus a big development in our North Carolina state government when we get back. Welcome back to Swing State. Tonight, HBU's Brandon Lenore and UNCG's Hunter Bacow and I are taking you inside this year's election, what it means, and we'll get to state races in a minute. But this is rare that someone who did this so recently gets to do it again and repopulate. So I think we'll see a more even transition, a more competent transition of power here. So who are the names we're hearing? We're hearing Vivek I'm sorry, I'm screwing up his name, but you know what I'm talking about, Vivek Ramaswamy. He might be in this. RFK Jr. may have a spot. I'm hearing Marco Rubio might be Secretary of State. What are we to make of it? I think more people are willing to be part of this administration than the first Trump administration. More mainstream people.
Well, it is interesting, and even names like Mike Lee, who's a senator out of Utah in the running for Attorney General. The important thing to remember is some of these people were never Trumpers, and they've gotten folded into the flock, so to speak. And I think that more people are lining up to be a part of the administration than they were when he first ran.
Experience begets experience. You can see he's halving this up with people with experience in Washington and people who may bring in to spice things up.
You know, when people used to ask me who would be in this administration, the first name I came up with was Tom Cotton, the Arkansas senator, who I said would be quality defense secretary, and he immediately said, very politely, no thank you, I want to stay in the Senate. So that one's evidently not going to be part of it.
That's interesting, because I thought he would be the first one to jump in.
Exactly. I think he was one of the first they called. But you mentioned, Brandon, I think that's astute, that who's going to be Attorney General. That is the most important, I think, position, especially for Democrats who want to buy into this will be a mainstream administration. And you mentioned Mike Lee, the senator from Utah. Eric Schmidt is the other name, senator from Missouri. One thing you can say is at least both of those two people now, the last couple of years, they have been what you would have to call MAGA Republicans. So he's probably not going to go outside that venue for that position.
Not this time.
Does he have to? Should he?
Well, I think he tends to reward people who are loyal, and I think he's going to be going for people who have are drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and are in line with what his priorities are. I think that it would be a dice roll to throw somebody into Attorney General who isn't in lockstep with the administration.
Yeah, it would be nice, but I agree.
And they've been planning this for a while, so they're ready to go in because they haven't even submitted to the transition process yet. And so they have it all ready. They're just going to unleash the gates.
Right. All right. So before we get to the state stuff, I want to mention how abortion referenda were on 10 ballots this year. It might be again in 2026, but I do think what we're doing as a body politic is we're litigating this issue in each state, and I don't think it's going to be a huge issue in the 2028 campaign because it will be largely settled by then. Am I wrong? Not completely, but largely. It will not be the factor it was in 22 or this year.
Well, it may not be the factor, but I think it's not going to be resolved. I mean, the fact is the issue, no matter which direction it is moved, there's going to be people who are displeased with the direction that it goes.
In 7 states, it got enshrined in the state constitution.
Yes.
But give Trump credit. I mean, he played this beautifully by saying, I'm moving it back to the states for decision making closer to the people. And then it was on the ballot. So it kind of shielded him from that issue during the election.
But look at these in the history. If you look at Dred Scott, if you look at the Plessy segregation decision in 1896, and then Roe, these were all where we were having this heated discussion publicly, and the Supreme Court came in and said, no, discussion's over, we're choosing a winner. That's why it was volatile. And when it goes to the states and people hash it out there, it tends not to be nearly as volatile.
I guarantee you it'll be reframed come next election.
Well, and they brilliantly framed it to this point,
Exactly.
as we've talked about. The Democrats have brilliantly framed it. But I want to get on to the states here. The Democrats broke the Republican supermajority barely. The Republicans only need to peel off one House Democrat to have a supermajority. They have it in the Senate, they don't have it in the House. But the veto's still alive, is it not now? It's back to life? We've like, put the whatever those things are that you revive people's hearts with.
Well, I think that the governor is going to be coming into a position to where he can force the Republicans to come to the negotiation table because he does have the veto. So I think it's going to make him more powerful as a governor compared to his predecessor, and he's going to be able to actually do negotiation. Now, whether that takes place is the question. We could be in a situation of gridlock, but they're going to have to work nicely with each other to get anything done.
Unless they get Tricia Cotham again.
Well, as an old North Carolina boy, the negotiations are going to take place in the legislature. They're not going to take place between the executive and the legislature. They got 3 people they can peel off down east in the Democratic Party.
And you think they'll try to make them do so? Just so you don't know, if you don't know, Tricia Cotham, you might have heard that name. She was a Democrat who the Republicans got to change parties 2 years ago to give them, again, the supermajority. They needed that vote. She, by the way, won by 0.5%, 275 votes out of 54,000 cast for re-election this past week. Do you think that's what they're going to do, is try to permanently change someone party?
I don't think they're going to permanently change. I think that person is going to be able to get better and more for his or her district. There are three districts down east at Eastern 95 that are Democrats that have a propensity to vote with the Republicans on certain legislation. Now we'll see. Stein is also experienced in Raleigh, so we'll see how he does in negotiating with them as well.
Democrats successfully continuing this pipeline to the governorship. It usually goes to the Attorney General's office. I mean, Mike Easley did that. Roy Cooper did that. It seems like they've got this set up. Permanent governorship.
AG is aspiring governor. I mean, that's what AG stands for.
I didn't realize that.
I think that the fact that the Democrats were able to get the AG's office, they also have a unified executive. I think that they're in a strong position to possibly hold on to it for the future.
Republicans could have had this gubernatorial race had they not nominated someone that was so just problematic.
Yeah, because Stein wasn't a super strong candidate like Roy Cooper was.
No,
Yeah, I mean, he's a solid candidate, but not in that. Roy Cooper's an exception. He's an exceptional candidate.
Your Democratic candidate governors come from the east and the west. They don't come from the center.
Yeah. And by the way, now Jeff Jackson is the Attorney General, a very quality, he comes off very well. He can campaign well. Real quick though, what's next for Roy Cooper? Is it a challenge to Thom Tillis in 2 years, who's up for re-election, assuming Thom Tillis runs again?
Go ahead.
It's possible. It's possible. I think that he was positioning to be in a cabinet post pending a Harris victory.
Yeah.
So I think that right now he's doing some soul searching and trying to figure out what his next move might be. But being governor of a state, especially an important swing state, he could have a future in lobbying. So who knows which direction he goes.
And he's not young. He's, I think, pushing 70 years old, so maybe he wants to make a little money.
And that's the key. And we also are assuming that Tillis is going to run again.
Right.
If Tillis bows out, then you could see somebody else there.
I used to think he wasn't. Now I'm beginning to think he might. All right, so where all this is leading in electoral politics, as in who may be involved in the big races in 2026 that we just previewed, plus some fun and interesting facts about this year's race when we come back. Welcome back to Swing State. I want to go back to the federal idea again because I want to know what do we think Kamala Harris' future is? Does she try to return to the Senate? Is that too small of a venue for her? What happens to Kamala Harris? She's still just turned 60.
That's a tough question because I don't think she's going to come back at this level again because it's hard for anyone who's been defeated to do that.
Right.
So it's going to, you might see her in some statesman-like role with a nonprofit or some major national nonprofit.
So she's no Adlai Stevenson. For those who don't remember, he was from Illinois, ran against Eisenhower twice, lost each time.
Maybe more of an Al Gore
Or William Jennings Bryan.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But
do you have any thought on that?
I don't know what she'll do. I mean, I don't think that she's going to disappear. I think that she's going to be playing an important role within the Democratic Party. But what capacity, we have to wait and see.
I was a little bit struck, and maybe this reaction was always there, but I tend to think it's a sort of a Gen Z thing. We've seen on social media people, I would call it way over the top reactions to this. People literally bawling, and I saw this one woman say, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I won't have any rights. I can understand being upset about the election and feeling that it may not take the country where you want it to go, but I'm going to have no rights?
That's on reproductive freedom and reproductive rights. I think that's where a lot of women saw it. And also a lot of black women saw this as an opportunity that was squashed again. And so I think you're going to have some of that post-mortem grief, so to speak, because a lot was riding on for women. And, for Democrats and women Democrats, this is two tough blows back to back.
Well, just along that, to move that a little bit, I saw someone who's actually fairly well known in this area, a white male, say we just burned the entire country to the ground with this election. Again, I think over the top. What's your take on this?
Well, I think that, we heard similar, but on the opposite side back in 2020 with people who were wringing their hands and concerned about the direction the country was going to go because of Joe Biden. I think that when you are in the fog of an election, it's hard to take that step back and take a sigh of, a deep breath and put it into perspective. There were a lot of people that are very passionate about the issues that were at stake in this election, and they feel let down, and they're letting their feelings be known.
All right, my quirky factoid here that I wanted to bring up. I just think this was interesting. Some of the states, and I think Arizona is one of these that has a lot of mail-in voting, they're really struggling to count the votes because they have to match a signature with the signature that's on the ballot. And they're saying Gen Z voters don't have consistent signatures. Now, part of this is they're young, they haven't signed their name for a long time and developed whatever their signature is going to be. Mine's changed since I was 20. But they just don't write their name.
They don't sign anything.
Yeah.
I mean, they just click it and go.
They don't write in cursive. Some schools aren't even teaching the kids to write in cursive, so they print their name, and that's not an autograph. That's not a signature. So that's part of the challenge.
Is this going to lead to lawsuits? Because people say, well, that's not the signature, when it may well be.
I think it might lead to innovation where people get a number to print on the envelope instead of, and so that's an ID number that's specific to that person.
We tend to be good at those innovations
Yes.
when we run into troubles and stuff, I think. All right, overall thoughts here. What should people be thinking about? What will we know maybe in 3 to 6 months that we don't know today?
Well, we're going to have the data to be able to figure out who actually turned out. Now, the question obviously is who they voted for, but we're going to have a better picture of who all turned out and be able to analyze the numbers. The exit polls are showing that there was a shift within the electorate, and the question comes down to, was it a Kamala problem or is this a Democratic problem?
Well,
and we're
Bernie
gonna have to wait and see.
Sanders says it's a party problem, right? And I think he was right about this. He said, we stopped talking to working class voters about working class issues. And I don't think he's wrong.
Sorry.
You can't do that when Donald Trump is talking to them and feeling their pain and their understanding.
Well, couldn't
that he
you
gets
match him
them.
in that?
No, because you got the inflation that's skyrocketing
Yeah.
and it's tied to the Democrats. It's an albatross you can't really get rid of.
But do you see, remember though, look at who the bulk of the Democratic Party is now. It's wealthier than the average Republican. It's more educated. It's more suburban. I mean, the parties have kind of flipped fairly
they have.
quickly, because that's normally a very slow process.
Well, and we're watching the shift, and especially when you look at the traditional Democratic voting populations within women and within people of color, they're starting to sample the Republican Party, and we may be witnessing a realignment from what the traditional party breakdown used to be.
I think we need to see the depth of that peel. I think
Right.
the numbers are going to tell us that. If it's deep enough, then there's some trouble for Democrats and something to be proud of for Republicans.
Because 16 years ago at this week, we thought we had a permanent Democrat coalition led by President Obama, and they called it what? The Ascendant. It was the era of the Ascendant, or whatever the term they used. Basically that could never be broken, and it got broken in 6 years. So the Republicans may think, oh, we've got this now. We got Hispanic men coming over and enough black men. It's not going to last. It's always going to keep shifting, isn't it?
Well, it's going to keep shifting, but I think that it speaks to the issues that were really salient to the voters versus what was salient to the campaigns. And I think that it came down to the economy. James Carville probably is grinning, not because of the outcome of the election, but because his saying of "it's the economy, stupid" rang true, kind of like it did in '92.
Just a few seconds left. I want to go over we're going to have a whole open seat in the presidency in 4 years. Democrat side, what? Wes Moore, Josh Shapiro.
Gavin Newsom.
Yeah,
Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, Newsom.
Republican side, it could be any. It could be J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard.
I think it's all wide open. I think the next 4 years we're going to see people jockeying for that position,
Yeah.
doing things to get them favor with both parties.
You going to call who the next president's going to be?
I could barely call this one.
Yeah, that's true. But it was fun, wasn't it? Let's hope people generally take grace for the team that won, have grace with the people who didn't. For the people who didn't win, please try to understand why that might have happened. All right. Well, we started this little television experiment 39 weeks ago on February 18th and have had all the most significant figures in this studio to reveal who they are and what they wanted to do in office. We know a lot of you are looking forward to a break from all of the politics, especially all those TV commercials. So Swing State is going on sabbatical until this forum is needed again. Until then, thanks for watching. We hope you found it valuable.